All right, we are getting to the end here of our examination of post tags, and we're going to talk about a small little group of some of the less common tags. Now, there are some even more less common ones than we're going to look at here that we're not really mentioning at all, but you could scan through and get an idea of those in the full post listing documentation. So let's just take a look at a few of these here and how and when you might want to use them. So the first one we're going to look at here actually would probably belong better in the most common tag section, and that is the permalink and get the permalink. But we didn't mention it there, so we will include it here towards the end. And what this does is either output a link to the post based on however you have them set up in the pretty permalinks section. So that could be using a date stamp, it could just be using the URL, it could be all sorts of different things based off of that setup, as well as get the permalink, which will just return the value so that you could save it in a variable and just echo it out. So depending on how you might use those two. So we'll take a look at those in a moment after we talk about some of the other ones. But this is also something that you've seen quite a bit. Now the next one is the title attribute. So this kind of goes along with the permalink. If you're building a permalink yourself, you might want to have the title of the post, and you might be inclined to just echo out the title, but there may be characters in way the title is displayed that don't work if you're using it as an HTML attribute. So this is meant specifically for this one purpose of adding the title attribute using the title of the post or page. So we'll look at how that is implemented. Then we have the short link. So on any WordPress site, if you use $P equals and then an ID of a post, it will link you to that post, and then WordPress, based on your permalink structure, will redirect it and change the permalink to look how you intend it to. So we could play around with getting the short link. That could be helpful for sharing stuff out, something like that. And then finally, one that is not common but is very powerful and is good to know about, called the meta. So it is possible with posts to attach post meta, sort of like custom fields inside the admin area, and then we could get those out either all at one in our templates, or we could use get post meta to get a specific field or a specific piece of metadata out. So we'll look at all of these together, including the meta and get post meta. Okay, so if I come into my theme here, I'm going to start off in our index file, and inside where we create an H2 with a link, we see that we already have the permalink right here. So that is very helpful. Now, we talked before in the section on common tags how you could actually pass something in here that would look like H2, A, href, and then we'd concatenate in something like get the permalink, and then we would close that out, and then in another one we would close the anchor tag and the H2. So let me just test out that this is right real quick. Okay, so if I come into my blog post, I could see that I still have my H2 with the link echoed out. So this would be an instance where you wouldn't want to do the permalink here, because that will echo out the link and break this. So if we go back and look at this now, we could see something entirely different. So we have our H2, but this is just printed to the page and it breaks the link down here. So if you are concatenating strings of text together, combining strings of text together, you want to use get. Now, if I undo all of this, actually, let me copy it there so you can see it. So we'll put this down here and comment it out so that you could look at it later and compare the two. So if we are just echoing out the title and a link like this, we say href, and then we could get the permalink. But if we're building a string and then need to actually pass that as a parameter, it can't be echoing it out. It needs to just get it and save it in that string or as a variable in that case. Not saving as a variable, but working in the same way as a variable. So that would be the permalink and get the permalink. So the next one we see is also implemented here, which is the title attribute. We have a title tag set up and then the title attribute. So if we come over to our site and hover our mouse over it, we'll see that sticky pops up underneath telling us, helping with the accessibility of our content, and then down here the title attribute appears. So in this one case, rather than using the title, use the title attribute, because there may be characters that you don't want actually being displayed in here or may break this, like if there is a double quotation mark that might be unexpected, something like that, it'll prevent those things from happening. So that is the title attribute and how we would use that. All right, next up we have the short link, and I'm going to come into the single.php template, and up top here, above the byline that we include with the date and the categories, I'm using the P class, again, byline, and I'm printing out the short link, and you could pass in any text that you want to appear as the actual title of the link. So this is going to output an actual link to the page, an anchor tag, the href value, and text and all. So what we could pass as a parameter is the text that we want to appear. Then I'm using get short link, WP get short link. Notice that it's different. It's not get the short link. So a lot of times you'll see get the, it's actually WP. So that will get us just the URL by itself and print it to the page. You could use this if you wanted to build your own anchor tag. So let's just take a look at each of these in action. So if I come over to the site and I click into an actual post because we're editing our single.php file, notice that we have this short link here. And if we look at the markup behind it, we could see that we have an actual link and it's outputting all of this content for us, including the text that we told it to. So if we passed a different value, it wouldn't say short link, it might say something else there of your choosing. Then we also have the actual link itself. This may be helpful if you wanted to pass it to a sharing feature just to have a shorter URL, or if you wanted to use it as just printing the link for easy copy and paste, whatever reason you may have behind it, it's just good and helpful to know. You may also find that you never need to use short link, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend using get short link over the permalink because you notice that this is not the URL that we would expect to see. And if we copy and paste this into the browser, notice that it's going to redirect the URL to something different based on our permalink setting in the back end. Just to show you real quick, if you're not familiar with permalink setting, under settings, we could find permalinks, and this determines how our URL structure works. I like post name. We have the day and name set up at this point, but you could customize that and that will change. But this URL structure, the plain one, will always work. If you paste that in, it will redirect you to wherever else you want. And this is what the short code is. Okay, so next up we have post meta, and I want to come in and edit a post to show you this. So what I did was I added two new custom fields, location and lodging. Let's imagine that we had a travel blog, and I'll show you how I did this. I come down and click enter new, and I could say location, and we took a trip to Tahiti, wonderful place, and then lodging was camping. And now we could save this. And by default, this information won't show up. This is just post custom meta. And if you don't see this, come under screen options up top here and make sure that the custom fields box is checked. So under the screen options at the top of the page, if you're not seeing those show up, that will toggle it on. So by default, this won't show, but we've set it up to show the whatever the fields are and then also showing how to grab one specific field. But if we go to another page that doesn't have these, so if we come into paginated, notice that it has no custom fields set up, so that will display nothing. So we have some conditional logic going on as well that we'll look at. So coming into our single.php file, down here underneath our content, we have this if statement. And what it's saying is, well, actually, let's skip over the if statement for now, and I'll show you the simpler stuff, and then that if statement will make more sense in a second. So this is nothing but outputting text to the page. It's saying post meta is going to be, and this is what we really want to look at. This is the meta, and what the meta does is display a list item of all the different meta items that we have. So this is the text that we outputted, and then this is automatically being generated, just the key value pairs separated by a colon. So if we didn't want that, if we wanted to do something else, we could grab specific ones or grab all of them and customize how it appears. So below that, again, we're just outputting text to say location. We use get post meta, which takes a few different values. The first one being the ID of the post. So we're passing in the ID in this way. And then we're saying the specific field that we want to get. So we want to get location. If we wanted to get lodging, we would type lodging, and it is case sensitive. So that would make a difference. So we're grabbing the location field. And again, that just matches this value right here. And then the last value is whether we want this to return an array or a single value. So let's say that I did not I did not ask for a specific field. I wanted to get all of them. This by default, get post meta returns an array of them. And even if we just had one value coming back, it would still give us an array. So if we want it to be a single value, meaning that we could echo it out directly just as a string, then we want to set this to true. If we wanted to get back an array and loop through them, we could leave that off because by default it is set to false. So this may not be something that you use a ton, but if you needed a way to get a quick post meta field or extra bit of metadata in with posts, this is how you could set it up for your template. Now, it is important that you match these because you do need to know exactly the names if you're using get post meta, but if you set up your themes or working with a particular client, that may not be hard to do. I will mention at this point that this is where you may see other like custom field type things, plugins being set up around custom post meta and making this easier to use and call, but this is the core capability way in WordPress that you could get access to it. So now to just hop up and do this if-else statement, kind of working backwards, we're basically getting all of the post meta. So remember, if we don't ask for a specific field, we're going to get back an array of all of them. And we're saying if this array is greater than, so count is going to count the number of items in it, the length of it, and we're saying if it's greater than 2, then do the following. So you may be wondering, why do we say 2? And I have this line of code here that I'll uncomment out, which is just going to echo out get post meta. So the same thing we're doing here in counting, because I want to show you why this value 2 is important. So if we come down now, we could see that we have this array with edit last, edit lock, location, and lodging. And if we go to a different post that has no post meta, we could see that it is saying edit last, WP old slug, and then edit lock. So actually in this case, we'd actually want the value to be 3. And if you don't have revisions and things like that, then it might be a different value. So running a conditional statement on this is a little tricky. So in this case, you could see that the information is displaying here, even though there isn't anything. We come down to another post, it doesn't have the same post metadata saved. And this is all WordPress saving stuff internally. You'll notice also the underscore. So coming back to this approach, this may not always be the best approach of counting everything up. Another thing that you could do is set this up a little bit differently and use a different function of. So one thing you could do here differently is instead of using this count, we would search for a specific field. So in this case, we're going to say, okay, look, if location exists, then go ahead and, or actually we could wrap this in an empty if it's not empty. So if the location field is not empty, then go ahead and display all this. And we're just going to assume that if location is filled in, we also have lodging. Again, this different ways of approaching this, but let's just test this out real quick. And we could see when we go to a page that even has 3 in the array, it's not there. But if we come down and we have one that does have the location, then that is showing up. So I'm going to comment this back out. And I'm going to leave this as the final solution recommendation, but remember that you can go back and use count to see if there's a set number in the array that you want to display it off of, but this may be a little bit better solution. So this is how you would work with basic post meta. There's a lot more that you could do with it depending on if you need. So explore get post meta and the meta a little bit more if you like in that regard. So this takes us through some of the less common tags, although like I said, the permalink and get the permalink, they might almost belong in most common tags used, but these other ones not as common, but again, helpful to know, especially the meta and get post meta. These are very helpful functions, and get post meta kind of leads us into the next thing of looking at get underscore tags and how they work differently and often come in combination with the underscore tags. So go ahead and play around with any of these that make sense or might be something that interests you or ring a bell, or at this point, if none of these really seem like something that you'd be working on in the short term, then you could just go ahead to the next video and we'll get a bit more in depth into the underscore versus get underscore post tags.